Hello, my name is Greg Andrus. I'm the Vice President of the Democratic Party of Evanston. This is part of our video interview series that we're doing with all of the candidates up for election in the municipal elections coming up this February and April. I'm here today with Alderman Don Wilson, who is currently Alderman of the 4th Ward and is running for re-election. If you're not a member yet, you can join as a member on the Democratic Party of Evanston website. That's evanstondems.com. You can join either as a dues-paying member, or if you'd prefer to volunteer and become a member as a volunteer, we have some opportunities coming up. There's a few special elections I can get you hooked up with. Just reach out to us and let us know that's what you'd prefer. The ballots for our endorsement are going to be going out tomorrow on January 17th, and they are due back in by January 23rd at 8 p.m., which is when we'll announce the results. Alderman Wilson, why don't you take the first couple of minutes and just tell us all a little bit about yourself.
Well, thank you. And also, thank you for doing this. I realize that there are an awful lot of candidates, so this is a pretty tall order to have you go through and interview everyone, but I think it's particularly important in the environment we're in, where our opportunities to interact with people are very limited. So I'm very grateful for you and DPOA for taking this time and energy. Don Wilson, I'm the 4th Ward Alderman currently. I live on Main Street. I've been here since about 2003 and have been raising my 3 kids here along with my wife and an ever-evolving series of dogs who might not bark at passersby. In the background, you'll see a picture of Washington School. I live across the street. Before living on Main Street, we lived over in Florence, and really I guess the core thing here is that I love my neighborhood and I love Evanston. And when I really got involved in things, particularly with a couple of nonprofits in town, engaged in child development, things of that nature, as well as participating in activities with the school and volunteering at the school, I started to see different needs more clearly, and I also started to see how some things weren't being met. That was just in addition to general concerns about city finances, what I perceived to be a lack of attention to safety and infrastructure, inability to get from point A to point B safely, traffic problems, things of that nature. So that inspired me to throw my hat in the ring 3 terms ago. I love doing this work. I don't enjoy being a self-promoter, so that probably makes me a terrible politician, but I love doing the research. I love working with the community. I love talking to people, and I love solving problems. So my wife teases me that it's in my DNA to fix things that are broken, and that's both literal and metaphorical. But that's really what I set out to do. I like to look for how things aren't working correctly or could be working better, and try to improve those and make them better. And I feel like being the alderman has really given me a lot of opportunities to engage in that.
Thank you very much. So these questions came in from our members, and the first one, and a lot of people were asking questions along this line. How well do you feel that the city of Evanston has upheld its goal of assessing decisions and policies through a lens of equity?
Did you say how well have we done assessing the goal?
How well have we upheld our goal of assessing decisions through a lens of equity?
I think we've done a really good job of assessing. I think the upheld part is the more important aspect of things. There's been a lot of progress. So I think really the progress has been in the areas of identifying the issues and trying to educate the public. But with that, we have to educate ourselves as both members of the government or members of the legislative body. This is what I'm going to call an evolving area. So I think we've all learned a lot in the past couple of years, in the past 5 years, in the past 10 years, and throughout the course of our lives. Evanston, for all of our pride and diversity, we really still suffer from a lot of persistent segregation and inequity. There tends to be a lot of reliance on charity in the things that we do in our community and in solving problems. And there's nothing wrong with philanthropy. Philanthropy is extremely important, but I don't like to see the level of reliance that we have. I would like to see more of a transition or a continuing transition into empowerment. In addition to kind of the big broad terms, we do some things, we don't do some things, but there are like simple things like like beach tokens. You know, if residents have to pay for beach tokens. And I think there's a strong argument for the fact that that's probably fairly regressive. It's a fixed cost. And while we do have a pretty solid program to provide tokens for people in the community, that still requires somebody to go somewhere, get something, and or fill out a form or whatever it is. And that's not equitable. And when you look at that through an equitable lens, you're requiring somebody on an annual basis to go somewhere and say, I can't afford this, will you help me? And people shouldn't have to consistently go out and seek help for something that they should be getting just as a matter of course, and that's something that should be a right of theirs as part of the community. So it's things like that that I think we need to start seeing. You know, we call it an equity lens, but you know, people can do a lot with that and a lot with data to kind of twist that around and make it suit their needs. So educating ourselves, educating the public is probably the primary part, but we really need to start like taking things that are in place and taking each thing that we have in front of us and really focusing on those impacts and how it makes people feel.
Thank you. So we've got quite a few questions from our members about police. So the next few questions are all about policing. So as a alderman, how do you go about listening to and weighing conflicting calls from some constituents who might want less of a conventional police presence versus some constituents who might want more of one?
That's a great question on both aspects of that. The first part is, you know, most decisions that are of substance in Evanston have people for and against. So that's an interesting challenge that I've faced countless times as I've navigated the past few terms. But I think a starting point for me in processing what people are looking for is to find the fundamental points where people agree. So if you take the people who want more police presence, and you take the people who want to completely defund the police, at the core of their goal and their desire is to make sure that people are living and existing in our space safely. They both have completely legitimate points as far as the threat that exists for them. So if you start with those fundamental points, then you can break it down and start to look at the obstructions to each person's goal. So you take the person who wants more police. Okay, what are the obstructions to that? I don't want a police car sitting on my block. We had an incident in my ward a little while back where something happened, and I had people who literally wanted to have cameras set up. I'm not okay with that, and I wouldn't support that, but I understand why they want that. So, then you involve the police, you involve the community, and you try to get to that core goal and find the solution that doesn't harm someone, something that's going to be specifically effective. People are legitimately concerned that there are those in the community who feel targeted by the police. Our Black residents, I mentioned the persistent segregation. That's still a problem here. It's still a problem everywhere. It's interesting how, as a country, people like to use the word woke. We're more woke than we were before. But one of the things I wonder is how could we not see before? I spent a part of my childhood in the South, and the textbooks and the information that we have had just given to us on a regular basis created narratives. So we have to look at these problems with those narratives that people have grown up with and experienced to correct them. Another example of that came into play when I forget who initiated it, but there was an idea to create safe zones around schools, right? Those words sound great. Yes, we want schools to be safe. We want it to be safe around schools. There was a further push to have cameras in those areas. But if you break that down and you look at the proposed solution that goes with those words, the proposed solution was a suspension of someone's civil rights. So you can do stop and frisk without cause, things of that nature. So breaking that down, I opposed that. And some people were upset, how can you be against safe schools? I'm not against safe schools. I'm against infringing on people's civil liberties. So that's kind of the thought process and how I approach this. you said you had a couple questions on policing. I could get, a bit more into the specifics, but why don't we get into the questions, and then maybe you'll ask the question, and if I don't get a chance, I'll add back to that.
Sure.
Okay.
So you had mentioned in your answer, some of your constituents, Black and brown constituents, felt, were saying that they were over-policed. What do you do to, assure them that either they're not being unfairly policed, or that, if you feel they are, that the police officers are being held accountable for that?
Well, I think one starting point is to acknowledge that they are. And again, kind of going back to that, cause and effect component of, what is the problem and what are we trying to solve? That's two pronged. One is when the police show up and who they approach. The other part is what I'm going to call some personal accountability. When and why do we as a community call the police? And your first question alluded to this as well. There are people who feel like we need more of this. So is it that we need more, or is it that we need something that's different? So that's the first part. You have to acknowledge things, and then how are you going to change it? And that's the trickier part. We have a police department that I think is generally progressive and forward thinking. They acknowledge that they're not perfect, but in my conversations and meetings with them, there has, without exception, always been an intention and a willingness to cooperate in finding ways to do things better. When we were considering the body cameras, those were very expensive. So I had to look at that with a couple of lenses. What are they going to accomplish? How much do they cost? How are we going to pay for it? So I talked to a lot of people about that, people in the community, people in the command staff, and officers on the streets. The officers in the command staff, without exception, all told me, we absolutely want the body cameras. So I think that reflects an intention to have transparency as a goal. So if you have that intention, it's a lot easier to work with that group. You've got a culture that's amenable to that. I think our Citizens Review Commission is a good start. That's different than it used to be. I feel like we've been able to appoint people who are not the typical voices. I think with our boards and commissions, we tend to end up with a lot of the same people you see, like, they'll be on one board and then they'll go to a different board, or somebody in the family's on the same board. I appreciate that the group that we have is broader, and is, I think, going to have a broader age spread, a broader demographic. It's going to bring a much better perspective on the specific issue. They're very early in the process. I think maybe they had their first meeting in, like, I want to say June or July or something. And then of course this is all probably over Zoom, I expect. So I think we have to give that a chance to see how it plays out. I've looked at packets, I've seen information, I've seen descriptions of things that have happened, and I've seen that the reprimands were given, things of that nature. So I can see that people seem to be taking this seriously, and and I've talked to some people on the board before they started, and there was a clear intention to be independent. That was one of the conversations I had with one of them. They did not want to feel like they owed anybody anything, they were beholden to anybody for anything. And I haven't talked to any of them about it since. So that's important. It's important for them to feel like they have the space. When I was on Zoning Board of Appeals, that's a lot different, but I had the same feeling. If I'm doing something and I'm making a recommendation or making a decision, I don't want a couple of aldermen sitting out there giving me, an evil eye. I want to make sure that I feel comfortable. Now, whether they give me the evil eye or not, I'm still going to, stick by my position. But there's no reason to make the people that are volunteering feel like they are, in some way uncomfortable. I think another part that's important, and I use the word comfortable, members of the community need to feel like they are safe and, free from any sort of retribution or retaliation if they make a report. And I guess that kind of remains to be seen, but I and others, I think, are paying close attention to that. If anyone ever feels that way, I would certainly want to know about it. But people shouldn't feel that way, whether it's about the policing issues or really anything else in the community. You should have the comfort level to approach someone and raise a problem or a concern if it exists.
Okay, thank you. So the next question I had, and you had started to talk about oversight a little bit. You started to get ahead of me here, but so FOIAs, especially those made of the police department, have become something of a contentious issue in City Council lately. I know you've had a lot of meetings about whose responsibility that is. What do you believe the City Council can do to promote transparency and accountability when it comes to police FOIAs?
So FOIAs is a big question, particularly recently in the community. So I feel limited with your question, but I'll start by saying, personally, I don't think any one person should have complete control over any aspect of governance or policy. And, you know, I know that there are a number of people in the community who really feel strongly that an elected city clerk should have, you know, should be the sole person to do that. You know, regardless of the position, regardless of the elected position, I don't think you should ever have anyone operating without checks and balances. Despite the good intentions of the person, despite the good intentions of the body electing them, it's just not a good idea. You know, any one person needs input and feedback and checks and balances. So I feel like it's important to have those in place. With regard to the, like I said, the body cameras, we have consistent conversations over the policies and the procedures. You have to be thoughtful about, you know, who's a victim. So let's say something happens to someone, they're treated poorly. You have to balance, you know, a public right to know versus who the victim is. So generally, the person I like to look to first is if someone's mistreated by someone, let's say the police treated them improperly, the first person's interest should be the person who's harmed. So we should look to them first. We should make sure that they have all the information. They should have the body cameras. They should have everything that exists to enable them to, you know, understand what happened to them and to do with it what they want. So if they want to go to the press, if they want to have a press conference, whatever it is, that's great, because they were the person who was harmed. What I don't like to see is I don't like to see you know, politicians say, I want this person's thing so I can go, you know, be a champion for somebody who may or may not want to be a champion, have them be a champion for them. You know, in Evanston, we have an awful lot of the, you know, the white savior kind of thing that also persists. And I think that we really have to be mindful of that. We have to be concerned with the people who are impacted and harmed, and really put those people in the first, you know, priority. But at the same time, you can't hide things. You can't conceal things. You should not improperly retain those. You know, having completely open information, you know, I would not want, you know, we had problems a few years ago with information that was posted on the next request system. We had rape victims, a lot of like extremely personal information that really has no business being a Google search result. So, you know, we took action to change that and make sure that the clerk's office was handling things differently. And that's important, because as a resident, whatever your harm, whatever your circumstances, people don't have a right to everything that you have experienced. So I think it's important to protect people's information. But if it comes down to the decision process or things that we're doing or the police are doing, that's something that should be readily available to them.
Okay. So one of the other issues that you had brought up in your earlier answer was on the police review board. So the current system, the new one that's in place, it's the mayoral appointed and approved by city council board. How do you feel that new system is working so far? Or, you know, there have been some calls to replace that with maybe one that's elected. Is that something that you would be in favor of?
So I think it's really too early to tell how well it's going to work. I'm encouraged by what I'm seeing so far. The calls from those who want to have an elected board, I think that's been around for quite some time. I've had conversations with a number of people involved with that. There are various iterations. You know, there are, you know, some iterations where we would elect a bunch of people and give them a salary and things like that. I don't think that's a good plan. You know. Based on the level of work that's required. I also don't want to see a situation where we're politicizing this type of thing. You know, the idea here is to have independence and the ability to do the job without retribution. And I'm fearful that if there was, you know, if there was an election, what we've seen in the past couple of years is, for the worse, a lot of times the most money ends up carrying the day for an election. So we might like to think, okay, well, if we elect these people, it's going to be the people I know or the people I'm comfortable with. You don't have any guarantee of that. You know, you might get somebody who is, you know, complete other end of the spectrum, And they might, who knows, they could misrepresent during the campaign, whatever it might be. You could easily end up with people that are well-funded, heavily advertised, and in a position where they can do, maybe do harm, but certainly not do the independent, free from interference type of work that I think needs to be done for that.
Okay. And then the final question about policing concerns a specific incident that happened. And this is when the city of Evanston brought in the Northern Illinois Police Alarm System, or NIPAS, or NIPAS, however you pronounce that, to respond to the protests over at the university on Halloween. Do you believe the level of oversight the city has over NIPAS actions is sufficient? Or what would you do to make this relationship more transparent and accessible to Evanston residents?
So that was an interesting situation, right? We've got people that are saying two very different things. Along those lines, what I've done is I've met with and talked with some students who are there. I've met with some residents who live in the area. So I've tried to get a little bit better and clearer picture on, what happened. I also have a better sense of what individual people had personally experienced, also including the police. So it's apparent to me that some of the people that were there protesting, suffered some harm in different ways, and generally that's not what you want to see happen. The NEPA system, it's very important. We have something similar with the fire department, and we also have it with the police department. You never know what's going to happen. Earlier in the summer, we had, armed thugs with, I think, AK-47s and such attack the Best Buy. So you just don't know if something or when something like that could happen. So it's important to have that as a resource. On the other hand, if officers show up with badges covered or, their information concealed, I've heard conflicting reports on that, but I'll say this, that's never okay. That's never okay, period, if something like that happens. If an officer shows up or a group shows up and the conversational tone is something that's aggressive or inappropriate, or we're here to do whatever, the command staff should be alert to that and should address that immediately before the group's deployed. I think it's important for our command staff and the people who are on in the field to meet with and set the expectations and the tone before the individuals are deployed on whatever the specific mission is. I'm not 100% sure that we have what we want to have in place as far as that's concerned. I do know that the police chief and the others in the command staff are interested in making sure that we do. So I appreciate that. But I do think that we probably need some additional group training and some additional work with NEPAs. We are one community out of many. The police departments in different communities around us are different. There are different cultures. That's sadly, it's inevitable, but it's a fact of life. So, there are circumstances where we're going to have to rely on somebody that might have a different culture, but it's critical to set that tone when the people arrive. And I think that in my experience, if you have the command staff and you have the other officers set the tone, set the expectations, they're not going to go against the people that we're working with. And if they are, then they need to be off the list.
Okay, so moving away from the policing questions, and I've gotten some in chat. I just want to remind people I'm going to ask all the questions at the end after I get through the prepared questions here. So moving away from the policing questions, the next ones sort of concern the city government itself. Is there anything about the culture of our city government that you would like to see changed?
A few things. One thing I would like to see, I would like to see the council as a group work together more effectively. I try to stay off social media, but it's not escaped my attention that there are a bunch of people, maybe it's not a bunch, maybe it's a limited number. There are people in town who seem to think that the 9 council members, all work together and we're in cahoots on whatever. Nothing could be further from the truth. We often struggle with working together as a group in different ways. When I say that, I don't mean a disagreement on an issue. I think that there's probably not a single council member that I have not had a very heated exchange with in the past 4 years. That said, that's passion. So that's my passion, that's their passion. But my intention is always to talk through that. So there might be a heated exchange, but I listen to what's said. I listen to what that other alderperson has to say about what their constituents are concerned about, because it's one city, it's not one ward. And I try to look at, you know, the bigger picture items with that lens. So I would like to see the council work together more effectively. Another thing, it's very frustrating for me. It's very frustrating for people who come to meetings to, you know, sit there and listen to stuff that comes at us and not have an opportunity to respond to things, particularly if it's a specific issue. I mentioned that I like to talk to people and I like to work out problems. Some of the committees I've been on, like inclusionary housing, ethics reform, the nuisance premises, those were, you know, I tried to run those more as working groups. So people from the community would come, we had stakeholders involved, but I tried to run that as a working group. And I've done a bit of research, and I've actually made a reference to our rules committee to try to develop more of an established program on something that's called deliberative democracy. So the general idea is you get a group of people who, you know, aren't self-selected. You know, it's more randomized so that you don't have, again, the same, you know, opinions and same people showing up for everything, or the same person appointing them every time. But to have people engage in a specific issue for a finite period of time. I felt like those working groups worked very well because you end up with a product that includes a lot of different viewpoints. A lot of people came to those meetings with ideas that we hadn't thought of, the staff hadn't come up with. And you know, you vet those and you work through it, but the important component is that the community is actually having an opportunity to participate in that. And then that group will give, you know, the recommendation to the legislative body, and we can kind of take that process, and it gives you a much better starting point as far as, you know, whatever that ordinance or whatever that issue is. So I think that's something that's really, really important. There is so much frustration in the community, in the country, that people are disconnected. Yeah, I know that I've been criticized a lot for, you know, not having more ward meetings. It's not escaped my attention that, you know, earlier on I would have ward meetings without, you know, without a building on the agenda. If there's a development that's being proposed, there are a ton of people. You know, people know that we're talking about Harley Clark, you know, lots of people. If it's just a general information, not so many. And even disappointingly, Alderman Fisk and I have been having joint ward meetings for a number of years because we weren't getting much turnout for the budget. And, you know, small numbers turn out for that. I think that's not a reflection of lack of interest. I think that's a reflection of the feeling that there's not really an opportunity to participate in the process. Even if you have a ward meeting, you know, you'll listen to some questions, you'll answer things, but I always kind of feel like, in large part, that's just kind of an opportunity for self-promotion, right? I'm your alderman, I'm doing all this great stuff, and, you know, like, I'm not in it to self-promote, I'm in it to solve problems. So what I really want to try to do is find ways where people can effectively participate in processes on specific issues, not feel like they have to show up like, you know, every council meeting to raise something or to object to something. That's got to be exhausting. I know it's exhausting for us. So I want to get past the exhaustion and get more towards a more functional opportunity to engage. Okay.
Thank you. And we are running a little bit long right now, so I'm going to try to get through these quickly so I can make sure I can get to some of the ones that came to us from the participants. No, it's okay. We still got plenty of time. So the next one concerns the environment, and we had a couple of members asking about the Climate Action Resilience Plan. So the goal of the carbon neutral Evanston by 2050 with some, you know, interstitial goals. What do you feel are the biggest challenges we face in reaching that goal? And do you feel that the current goal is ambitious enough, or too ambitious, or just right?
Very important to have goals, right? You have to have targets. I think it's generally ambitious enough, but I think, you know, probably the biggest challenge we have to overcome is education and culture change. So we can tell people to do things all day long, but they're not doing them. We can set out recycling carts, and you know, people still put the recycling in bags in recycling carts. Like, you know, we need to try to find ways to get people to be more compliant in these things. And I think that starts, you know, from when you're a kid. You know, where I grew up, we got this messaging all the time. I don't know about everybody else or here, what kids see now, but it was like Smokey the Bear and give a hoot, don't pollute, and relentlessly on the cartoons that we saw. And I think that's a good thing. But that's kind of, I don't see that. I don't see my kids getting that same level of like information and messaging. If you travel to Europe, you see everybody bring their stuff down to the cart on the street, and they sort it in the bins, and that's just the way it is. So if it's just the way it is, you do it, right? If we enable people to do something differently, it's not going to be okay. I also want to I know I've mentioned this in other places, but I think it's important to get away from buying our way into things. We buy renewable energy credits to account for some of our carbon footprint reduction. That's fine. Renewable energy credits serve a useful and important purpose, but it's making people feel good and making people feel like we're making progress when the fact of the matter might be the house isn't using electricity. The building isn't using less natural gas. So I think we really need to let people know what they're using so they can track that and understand that they're not reducing, or when they are, and they can do the things that they need to do to actually make real change. I'll leave it at that. I know we're way short on time, sorry.
No, it's okay. So the next question is fairly broad concerning the budget. Do you feel overall that expenditures by the city of Evanston over the last 4 years have appropriately reflected the priorities, needs, and interests of Evanston residents?
You know what, I'm going to say that I don't. I think that there's been a lot of progress, particularly from when I started, like I said, a couple terms ago. I felt like there was a lot of money going to private development, a lot of money going to private development. And that kind of, I think that continued on, but that's tapered off, and that's a good thing. So I think some of that spending direction and the trend is in the right direction. But I really think that we need to be more focused on things like entrepreneurship programs, helping small businesses have access to capital, helping people afford a down payment on a home, working with lenders to have constructive ways to get people into home ownership, and and not just a different question for a different time, but focus on the businesses, not the buildings. We used to do things like we'd have facade improvements, like, okay, make the building look pretty, but it's the business inside. Do people have the tools that they need to start the business? If you go to college, it doesn't teach you how to run a business. If you have a great ideas don't come from college. You don't have to go to college to have a great idea. So we need to expand how we look at opportunity and make sure that we are giving people available resources who don't otherwise have access to those resources, be it training, capital, or otherwise. And we also need to, affordable housing. We need to make the streets and infrastructure safer. There's a lot to be done. Signal timing. These things don't cost a lot. The street lights aren't safe. They're really pretty. Those Talmadge lights are beautiful, but you could have a person stand under the light post and you don't see them. So these things, like focusing on functional needs of individuals living in the community over maybe sometimes we focus too much on what's pretty.
So you had started to mention in there business development, which ties into my next question as well. Even before the pandemic, it seemed as though downtown Evanston was full of empty storefronts. And of course, the pandemic has just made this, just exacerbated this. What do you believe can be done to promote development in a way that prioritizes small business and local ownership?
I touched on that a little bit. If you look at some of the historical models, one of the things that happened, and thankfully this was before my time, but movie theater development, that's great. Movie theaters there. But at the same time, some of the things that happened weren't so great. There were subsidies to put in an art supply store. That art supply store put another art supply store that was, I think, a third generation business out of business, Goods on Main Street. So, Goods was forced to evolve to something completely different. So you can't subsidize our existing businesses out of existence by doing things for other people. So that's sort of like, step number one. Number two, create space that's going to be inviting to the experience and to the actual operation of the business. Things are going to look different when COVID's done. So we have to be mindful of that. Our economic development director and our team are doing great work on being prospective and looking towards that future. And I think it's going to be a lot more experiential and a lot less like, walk in, hand a credit card and walk out with a product. I think people are going to really be looking for experiential types of things. We've got some exciting things that are, you're just about to start hearing about. So I'm not going to give those away, but that's, I think, really where we kind of need to focus is making sure that we're not harming the existing business. We are providing access to capital and providing people with resources that they need to have an equal playing field. We want to level the playing field. So, it shouldn't just be, a retired person who made a lot of money who has the opportunity to open a store or business. It should be open to anybody who has the good idea.
Thank you. So the next question concerns moving away from commercial development to residential development. Despite the number of new residential units constructed in Evanston over the last few years, especially in some of the developments approved by City Council, housing costs in Evanston are continuing to rise. Do you feel that the Inclusionary Housing Ordinance is doing enough to combat this, or what other solutions would you like to see implemented?
It will never do enough. So it's one prong among many. So the original Inclusionary Housing Ordinance that we approved, I actually voted against it because I was afraid it wasn't going to work, and I don't think it was working. So we went back to the drawing board, and I was on that committee and led work in actually revising that to come up with something better, which actually has resulted in some units of housing and has resulted in a lot of money coming into the system. So as you do that and as you go through that process, you also have to remember who's paying for the subsidy. Affordable housing is a really broad term. So at its core, is the housing and the housing opportunities in my community, are they affordable? Some people, misuse that and use it only to refer to subsidized housing. Affordable housing also includes market rate housing. So we have to have policies that do not harm market rate housing. So if, for example, if someone wants to build a 5-story apartment building, I'm going to encourage that to happen not at a place where there are, a 2 or 3-story apartment building with market rate affordable units. I want to see that happen on an empty lot or a nearly empty lot. I don't want to displace the existing housing. We've had people talk about the fact that we've lost, in the neighborhood of thousands or 3,000 units of affordable housing. We have not lost the units of housing. What's happened is that the housing has become unaffordable. Why has that happened? It's because people don't have a living wage. They don't have the jobs to support, the cost of the housing. So we can't lose sight of that fact. This is sort of the core aspect of the problem. So it's more than just providing the 4 walls. It's providing the 4 walls, but it's also ensuring that there is opportunities to, earn the money to pay for your housing. When you're doing the affordable housing, you also don't want to limit intergenerational wealth. So I know people will say, okay, let's build this place and let somebody buy it and they can live in it for however many years and then they can sell it. Well, if you look closely at the model, they buy the place, they live in the place for a while, and then they have to sell it to somebody else as an affordable housing property. So they don't make any money. I'd like to see us continue to get away from that. We have gotten away from that. I don't want to see that come back. It's really hard. We've had great success in accessory dwelling units, but you know what? That's after a long fight to get to that point. People didn't want that. So I'm encouraged that we now have that and we're making progress in that regard. Maybe we can get more progress with tiny homes. We simply need more housing. So we need more supply to meet the demands. It needs to be done more thoughtfully. It needs to be, density needs to be close to transit. We have a great transit system. Hopefully COVID won't do any, more harm than it's already done to the transit system. But, we have to be smart about that. I think we have been smart about it, and we need to continue that trend.
Thank you. So one of the biggest issues that we had gotten questions about it's a townwide discussion, but it's located in the 4th Ward, was about the Robert Crown Community Center, and in both its original inception and the cost increases as the project went on. So as the Fourth Ward Alderman, I just wanted to, ask if you could speak to, the process behind that. And I think a lot of people were frustrated about the communication about when the project was starting to go outside of its original scope.
So it's an amazing and great project, and I'm very proud of it. So it's serving, even with COVID, lots and lots of people in lots of ways. The fields are full every day. There are kids out there playing football, they're running around, having snowball fights. There are people on the little bumps, like with toddlers on sleds, and people using the library. So this is a great, amazing project. Unfortunately, it's taken about 12 years to come to fruition as far as my perspective is concerned. If you would have asked me the question 12 years ago, how do you feel about term limits? I generally think term limits are a pretty good idea, but I've had to temper that a little bit because I didn't realize it would take 12 years to build a community center. So if you rewind the clock all the way back to when I started, we've looked at a lot of different models for this. So one of the problems is it's such an extended period of time. So somebody 10 years ago or 12 years ago might have heard about the idea to partner with a private business where it wasn't going to cost the taxpayers anything. So we looked at that. Somebody might have heard about it and they might have thought that, okay, that's what we're going to do. But that's not what we did. We had to abandon that idea because it wasn't going to work financially. And short version of why is because if we did that, we were going to have to guarantee bonds in the neighborhood of what the bonds are right now. So that was a bad financial model. We looked at selling the property to a private development for $1 to have somebody else build it and operate it. That was not going to work. So at the end of the day, there was also a proposal to do 100% debt. Some of the aldermen actually pushed hard to try to get us to take a vote on just funding it all with debt. And I was not comfortable with that. So in the end, what we chose to do is to pursue a fundraising process. My personal expectation was that if we couldn't hit a $10 million target, I wasn't comfortable going forward with the project, and we did hit that. So at that point, I felt comfortable. It's not that I wasn't concerned about the money, but I wanted to make sure that we had a certain stake of outside money going into that. We paid down debt to make room for the borrowing. So over a period of time, we did pay down some debt to help make that more feasible and not be an undue impact. We paid for other things with TIF money. The downtown Fountain Square project was paid for with TIF money. So a lot of thought was given into the global overall financial picture as we followed through with that. So it's an important project. It serves everybody in the community. And going back to the idea of people shouldn't have to go around asking for things or whatever. I raised my kids in the neighborhood. Kids in the neighborhood didn't have access to a library. Kids in the neighborhood don't and they do now, didn't have access to computers. People looking for a job, didn't want to hike all the way from the 9th Ward to the downtown library to get to a computer terminal. Kids shouldn't have to, find a friend whose parents are home to print out their paper for their school project. This serves so many people in so many ways that I really feel like this is, contrary to what people are saying, rich people's whatever, that's just not true. This is serving people at every level in the community. There's a walking track. I've seen people of all ages up there using that. And, it's not safe. If you're older and you want to take a walk, get your exercise, you can't, maybe you can't afford to join a gym, but you can, walk over a couple blocks to take a lap around the Crown Center. Or if you want to drive there, you can still do that for free. So I think these are all really important things for all of our community. And I'm really proud of it. We have a maintenance fund that's going to help cover future costs. So I think it's an excellent model for the way government should be doing things going forward.
Okay, I had one last prepared question before I get into the ones that were submitted in chat here. So you've been on the city council for some time now. What would you say is one of the city council's decisions that you were involved with that, in retrospect, you don't agree with?
Well, I already mentioned the one about the first inclusionary housing ordinance. Let me see another one. This is a little bit different, but I think, one of my personal frustrations is that over the years, I feel like I've spent a lot of time keeping us from doing things that we shouldn't do. So, again, I gave the example of the, the cameras, looking on certain neighborhoods or the safe zones for schools. A lot of time gets spent doing that. And the frustration that is that it takes away from me trying to find a solution to, reduce the accidents on Ridge or reduce the accidents on Dodge. At the same time, it's important. So, okay, here's a good one. This is a great one, okay? We talked about the environment. We passed a plastic bag ban, okay? And at the time I did research, and it seemed to me, and I think it still seems to me, that paper bags are worse for the environment than plastic bags. So I talked to my colleagues like, look, all the research says paper bags are worse for the environment on a net carbon emissions basis and lack of recyclability. But some of my colleagues said, okay, I get all that, but we have to do something. We have to set an example, and we have to take a stand. I disagree with that. You should only set an example and take a stand if it's actually achieving the goal that you're setting out to achieve. And so while I think it was important to do some sort of, something to address the bans, just banning the plastic bags didn't solve the problem. And in the end, I'm fearful that it made the problem worse.
Thank you for that. So I've gotten a couple of questions in chat here, and I'll try to get through as many of them as I can. So the first one, continuing the discussion about affordable housing and developments. I'll try to reduce this because it's like a paragraph long. So you were part of the approval process for a number of developments in the last few years, of which affordable housing that's suitable for families, so not affordable studios, but affordable 2-bedrooms, we didn't get very many of those units out of it. Do you consider this a success from an equity perspective? And in the next 4 years, would you be open to actively working for affordable housing that's aimed towards affordability and not solely for what the developer finds profitable?
So, okay, that's a lot of parts. So let me try to put it all into one answer. We need more housing for families. These units that are in the high rises, it's, like I said, it's part of a multi-pronged approach. I would rather see family housing, in neighborhoods, not in a downtown area. So I think that's where it's better situated. If you're a family and you've got kids, getting your kids from, a high rise on Sherman is going to be much more of a challenge than if you live walking distance to the school. So I want to see the affordable housing to live up to its name. We call it the Inclusionary Housing Ordinance, but when we passed that, I objected to the use of the word inclusionary because I did not feel like this was inclusionary. I felt like this was it was something, but it wasn't inclusionary. So I would like to see us find ways to get alternative types of housing in place in neighborhoods where it's going to be comfortable for families to be, and that's where the equity lens comes into place. So putting a family in a space that they're not most comfortable in, that's checking the box. So I don't want to do box checking. I want to make sure that people are in housing that's safe, comfortable, and appropriate for what their needs are.
Okay. So the next one that came in looks like it's part of a follow-up to our discussion earlier on police FOIAs. Somebody wanted to point out that it was the police department when you had mentioned the failure to redact certain private information about victims, that it was the police department who failed to redact those things, and they want to know. So they feel that you're undermining what the city clerk is doing, and they wanted to know if that's something that that can be improved or avoided going forward.
So so that it's not entirely correct. So the point that I was trying to make at the time, and I still want to make now, is that just because somebody FOIAs something doesn't mean that all of that information should be published for the world to see. Let's say someone, this has happened. So somebody needs to get a police report for something that happened in their youth for a job they're applying for. And this kind of thing like literally happened. So the FOIA request said, please provide, the arrest report for when I was arrested for I think it was for drinking back in whatever, 1990 something. So that showed up for that person as like one of the top couple of Google results. So you Google a person and what do you see? You say arrested as a kid for alcohol. So that's not okay. So that was my point. In conjunction with that and other FOIAs, the actual documents that were being produced were produced to somebody in a non-redacted form. The person who asked for them was entitled to them in a non-redacted form, and they got them in a non-redacted form. That doesn't mean you publish them on the internet. So again, going back to that transparency thing, if somebody's harmed and their lawyer asks for the materials and the records, they should get them in the unredacted form, right? We shouldn't be redacting that. I don't think anybody could take issue with that. What shouldn't happen is that that stuff shouldn't be posted on the internet for the entire world to see and to find as a Google result. So I think, you know, we worked with the clerk over a period of time. There was, you know, there were some challenges in that. I don't want to get into that, but, you know, in the end, we came up with something, you know, in collaboration with him. I think that's much more functional and addresses that problem.
Okay. So I think we only have time for one last question here. And this, it looks like is a follow-up to part of our discussion about development, residential development. What are you doing to prevent gentrification in your ward and in the city to ensure that marginalized residents don't continue to be displaced?
Well, I actually think I touched on that a little bit, is that when we are looking at new housing, I don't want the new housing to displace residents. So period. So if somebody's going to come to me and want to take down an existing apartment building or even something, you know, it's harder if it's as of right. So if somebody comes and they're like, I'm going to tear down the single family home and build a giant single family home, and the zoning code allows it, you know, it's hard to kind of, you know, go through that on a spot basis. But generally speaking, I will resist, you know, that type of thing. There was somebody who wanted to do some kind of significant development over on Sherman, kind of across from the school, and it would have taken out a number of, I think a couple of apartments and maybe some houses. But in any event, that's the kind of thing that I don't want to have happen, and I will resist that. So if somebody wants to take out housing or take out market rate affordable housing, I simply would resist that and object to that. So like I said, the ones that I haven't voted for all of them. I know a lot of people like to say he votes for every tall building. I haven't. I voted against a number of them. And I voted against some where they came back and they came up with something better. So, but yeah, so it's, you know, unless it's something that would replace that, and they typically don't. New housing that's completely, you know, in addition to what we have is one thing, but displacing residents is something that I'm not okay with.
Okay, thank you so much. So I'll have to call it there for time because I have another interview in about 5 minutes. But Don, I wanted to thank you so much for joining us. And just a reminder to everybody, if you're not a member yet, you can sign up on our website, either as a dues-paying member or as a volunteer member. The ballots will go out tomorrow, January 17th, or January 17th if you happen to be watching this, not today. And then they're due back in by 8 p.m. on January 23rd. So thank you so much for joining us, Don.
Thank you very much. Thanks for your time.